You touched on the JobKeeper payment for the tertiary sector, the universities. Is there scope for the government, with the legislation that passed this week, $130 billion legislation, the largest expenditure ever from a federal government in this country in a 6-month period, but is there scope for it to be flexible on who gets that payment?
Well, I think it's quite interesting that there is, and Josh Frydenberg has put this in place, these kind of parts of the Act around the JobKeeper payments, to say he can change the eligibility criteria for a payment and entitlement to a payment without the Parliament coming back. Now, we know how keen the government is not to sit until August. This has really given them a good chance, because this was cobbled together quite quickly, this legislation, let's face it, and good job in doing that. But we've spoken about a couple of glaring holes. The big one is this situation I believe they really need to look at changing around. It's just so inequitable, because you could have a worker in one house and a worker in the next door house, not in the same scheme, not on the same system. If you work for a big company like Tabcorp or JB Hi-Fi or Harvey Norman, billion-dollar company, they've got to show a 50% reduction in turnover for you to be kept on under these JobKeeper payments. Smaller businesses than that, 30% turnover. It just has never made sense to me. In other countries, it's a standard rate across the board. The Prime Minister says it's because the bigger companies have bigger balance sheets. Yeah, that's okay, but you can have a massive turnover and a small profit. You can have a much smaller turnover and a massive profit. They've done it that way because they need a system to rely on to implement the payments. The Prime Minister's been at pains to say we want to use the existing payment system. That means looking at GST. That's a problem for small business too, Kieran, because small business collects their GST, their BAS statements, over a quarter, and this is month to month. So there are all these sorts of difficulties. Another thing people have said to me in recent days is, can the tax office actually cope with this system? I mean, they've got to do all our taxes. Well, can the computer systems cope with this brand new system, 730,000 new registrations? So much more to come in this story, but I think it is good news that the government has at least put in place a system where they can be flexible on changing some of the rules around this without having to bring the entire Parliament back to debate it and do it.
Like you said, it's such a massive, complex policy that no one's going to hold it against them if they've got a tweak here or there to save a few more thousand jobs. I mean, that just is a no-brainer. If they've got to change it, change it.
And the change I'm talking about to make everyone 30% turnover, I reckon it would only cost, and I know you say only, but 15 to 20 billion. Now, when you're doing 130 billion, what's the difference if you do 150 if it means saving thousands more jobs and stopping the big lines outside Centrelink? I think the way they've done it, you're going to see thousands more unemployed. Even in a political sense, that's not a good thing for them.
No, it's not. And speaking of political, not a good look, what about
Don Harwin?
New South Wales Minister Don Harwin? His Premier is out there being stronger than most any other leader, and yet he says, OK, I'm going to go to my holiday house.
Well, the Telegraph got him this morning, and the Oz and the Telegraph have got him again this afternoon, it seems, Kieran, because the story that's running on those websites at the moment is that the bloke who's spending time with him is a 31-year-old former Liberal candidate for Sydney, and that's okay, except there's a revelation on those websites this afternoon, or an allegation that he came straight from overseas on March 17 to join Don Harwin at the house. Geoffrey Winters, I think his name is. There he is. And as we know, the rules around that time where you should be isolating by yourself for 14 days. Now, has Don Harwin hung out with this gentleman and then gone and attended cabinet meetings when the guy should have been self-isolating? That's the question here. I mean, we saw disciplinary acts on this in other jurisdictions. New Zealand Health Minister was demoted for doing the same thing. It's such an important message. It's about saving lives. Yeah. Even a transgression like this, you'd have to wonder about Don Harwin's position. One reason he would feel safer than most is he is a close factional colleague of Gladys Berejiklian, always has been, almost lifelong friends. And the other thing is, she hasn't axed a minister in 3 years. Well, the problem with not axing ministers for doing the wrong thing, Kieran, is they'll continue to do the wrong thing. And maybe it's about time Gladys Berejiklian took a stand on this sort of thing.
A bit of accountability for a stuff up like that. It's not a good look when everyone's being told, don't go to the regions, stay at home, stay in your principal place of residence. Yeah, it's hard to miss. Thanks, Andrew.